Welcome to the Buddhistisches Tor Berlin podcast. Join us for live recordings from classes, insightful talks, and guided meditations.
So what I'll talk about today is, so my talk has that title, Why Buddhism? Yeah. So my talk will be Why Buddhism? And it's not really, it's a bit of a kind of personal reflection, really, trying to go back to, well, why should anyone be interested in Buddhism? So what does Buddhism have to offer, basically? And because, we are predominantly a tradition here where people are not born Buddhists. They like me, we come into contact with Buddhism probably at a later stage in life. That question is obviously quite prevalent. Why should anyone be interested in Buddhism? Really, why should we look at Buddhism? So for me, I think I was very fortunate to have come across Buddhism quite fairly early in my life. So I was 19, 18 really, when I came in contact with Buddhism. I was living in Japan at the time for a year, I basically what happened for me was that in that year when I was in Japan, I was it was basically like a gap year between high school and uni, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah, I just wanted to figure out what will I study when I come back to Berlin. So I'm originally from Berlin. A rare occasion that you can meet a real Berliner. You can ask me questions. Oh, great. Usually I'm the only one here. Very warm welcome. I feel at home now. Which part of Berlin are you from? Kreuzberg.
I was born in Oberkrankenhaus.
Ah, okay. Wow, great. Auch Oberkrankenhaus? Zehlendorf. Okay, so you're Zehlendorf, you're Kreuzberg, I'm Lichtenberg. So between us, amazing. I'm very happy now. Yeah? You grew up in Berlin. Okay. In Zehlendorf. Great. Anyone else? You know someone else. I have a friend from Berlin. Okay, amazing. Usually, there's like 100 people in front of me and no one's from Berlin. Even on the German-speaking classes, usually people are not from. Anyway. What was I saying? I was in Japan. A little Berlin boy from Japan. No, in Japan. So for me, yeah, basically I was teaching German. I was working in this language school. And I grew up completely without religion. So I come from, as I said, Lichtenberg. So that means my whole family has a GDR background, right? So my whole family is East German. It is still like interesting to have that divide even these days in Berlin, the whole East-West divide, because even though I grew up in the late 90s, 2000s, still in Lichtenberg, everyone was from East Germany. Like I did not know anyone from West Germany. I did not meet a sort of West German at all. Like I just didn't meet them. Like even all my teachers were from the East. All friends were from the former East Germany, etc., etc. So we had one guy in our class who was Christian, and we thought that was really weird. Like that was like the weirdest thing ever. That was like, why are you like this is completely like this is. Because what you do when you become 14 in 8th grade, the whole class celebrates this thing called Jugendweihe, which is kind of a sort of atheistic version of confirmation, basically. So he was the only one who didn't follow us, who didn't join us, because he had his Christian confirmation at the same time. And we thought that's really strange. So this is the sort of prevalent view. So. What I noticed in Japan, I don't know why. Maybe I'm just a weird kid, but somehow I really felt the lack of that for the first time. So I didn't really feel the lack of religion growing up, but when I was in Japan, I really could feel the lack of something like that in my life. Just something that was kind of. Japan isn't a particularly sort of spiritual country. It's just all the religious traditions are just very much alive, at least in a sort of traditional kind of way. If you ask Japanese people, they would say, "Oh, I'm not really believing in it. I'm just following through the motions of those rituals." But still, that I felt like, oh, that was somehow missing in my life. Somehow this was absent. And then the other thing, which I kind of which I felt was that I did not want to work, which is sort of probably a common feeling when you're 18, 19. I refused to believe that my whole life should just be given to work. I called my parents and was like, "So what do how do you manage that? How is that possible?" And the good sort of post-socialists they were like, "Well, work is what life's about, so you better get on with it." That's what you do. So anyway, so that was that feeling. But what I noticed then in coming into contact with Buddhism mainly through ritual and mainly through a sort of traditional society, mainly through just the spaces of temples and statues and the incense and sometimes in those rituals you would get like huge fires where they would burn things and I don't know, lots of instruments and nothing was like logical whatsoever. Like there was no logic to any of it, but it sort of went beyond logic. And I just remember being like, oh, I have absolutely no idea what this is, but I want it. This is what I want. So then I came back to Berlin and looked at Buddhist centers, and because I had absolutely no idea what any of it meant. And actually came through the doors of this one. Yeah, unfortunately there wasn't any fire and instruments, which I really didn't like for the first few years. I thought it was all a bit tame and boring. It's not like that anymore, obviously. But we still don't have fire. Anyway, we'll change that soon. No, we don't. God, sorry, my mind is a bit mushy and I keep getting sidetracked. So what was really interesting for me was that you come to a Buddhist center with this kind of idea of what Buddhism is. We all, even if we notice that or if we don't notice that, we have some sort of preconceived idea of what Buddhism is about or what it should be about. And then for me to get closer and get more and more involved with Buddhism was both a path of discovery of what Buddhism meant, and I feel like I'm still discovering that. I feel like I'm still on that path of figuring out what those Buddhist teachings are actually trying to say, what the Buddha 2,500 years ago really was trying to communicate to us. And at the same time, it was a path, and still is a path, of discovering myself and getting to know more and more what my views are and what my expectations are and what my kind of makeup are, what my conditioning is. So especially in the beginning, what was clashing was that very strong conditioning as a very convinced atheist. And I was also in sciences at the time, so I had a very, very scientific, I went to like a scientific high school and all that, and that was just my world, so I was just around science people a lot, and I was just convinced that, you're religious if you're a bit sort of weird or something, or, basically all religions are cults. Like, that was my conception of religion, basically. So it was like, how can a grown man believe in anything? It's like, how's that possible? But then, so this was all here, but then kind of coming from down here was a longing for religion. So it was like, shit, what do you do with that? So that was a huge conflict in, well, the conception of myself, in the kind of, I really felt like I had no, well, it felt a bit like sort of destiny or something like that. It felt like this weird sense of you don't have a choice over who you are or something. And for me, it did feel a bit like a sort of second coming out, because I did have that, finding out I was gay was a sort of similar experience almost of like, gosh, I can't choose anything, can I? It's just life is sort of throwing things at me now. And it felt a bit like that, discovering like, oh gosh, now I am probably a religious person. I am someone who is interested in religion, even though I didn't want that at the time. But I just really felt like this sort of weird sense of, well, how will I marry those two things? So what I do think, what that meant for me was a sort of a discovery of, oh no, there is a lack of something higher. There's a lack of something, I don't know, that goes beyond the senses, without sort of trying to, well, what I was always afraid of was that I would just become a sort of person with blind faith and who wouldn't believe in science anymore or something like that. So luckily, looking at Buddhism a bit more closely now, luckily that doesn't have to be the case. Yeah, luckily we can actually marry those two things quite well, I think. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the three sort of core principles of Buddhism, so you can sort of follow me on my journey of getting to know Buddhism and noticing what it is about, and just sort of my reflections on that. So what I'll go through is I'll go through the three jewels of Buddhism. Yeah. In the beginning, I was already explaining them in a very short way. So the first one is obviously the Buddha. So we'll be talking about who the Buddha is. Then I'll talk a little bit about what the Dharma is, which is the teaching or the truth of Buddhism. And then lastly, I'll say a bit about the Sangha, which is the community, which means community, the community of practitioners, but especially the community of those who've gone before us. Because those three things are what are at the heart of every Buddhist's life. Yeah, this is what makes one a Buddhist, if we put those three things at the center, at the core of our being. Yeah, and for me, I didn't come through the door and think, yes, I'm going to put the three jewels at the heart of my life. Like, this is not how that happens. It's just, and if you do that, then it's usually not authentic. You know, like, usually not very genuine, because you do get people who are very enthusiastic, but which is great, but. Usually you then realize, okay, you need to get all of yourself on board as well. So for me, that was a gradual process. So for me, I would say it did start with the Buddha, you could say, because the first thing I ever met was a Buddha statue in Japan. That was the first thing I came into contact with. I did not know what the Sangha was, or who that, I didn't meet any Buddhists, and I also didn't hear about the Dharma. Yeah, I didn't. Then obviously I read up things, but my first real meeting was a meeting with, at least a statue. Yeah, Japanese statues are beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're like, I think they're sort of the pinnacle of Buddhist art. I don't think it gets any more beautiful. I think, that's obviously my taste, but I think it's just like they have sort of managed to bring so many different elements together in just one statue. In one Buddha statue in Japan, you can just find all the different qualities of like groundedness, solidness, fearlessness, but also gentleness, ease, relaxation. It's just all in one thing. Like it's all in there. I don't know how they do it. I really don't know. A lot of work probably. So for me, what that means is to put the Buddha at the heart of my life as a Buddhist. What that's come to mean is to, turn towards something higher in our lives. Turn to something that goes beyond the mundane, if you want. Because for us as Buddhists, the Buddha represents our potential. Yeah, so the Buddha represents. Both the teacher, obviously, but also on a more fundamental level, the potential of what we can become. So the core myth, you could say, of Buddhism is that of development, is that of evolution. The Buddha describes that at the eve of his enlightenment, after he got enlightened, he sort of surveyed the world with his Buddha eye, I suppose, seeing that all beings are like lotuses in a lotus pond. Yeah, this is the core, you could say, myth or symbol of humanity for Buddhism. That we're all like lotuses in a lotus pond, which are all at sort of different stages of opening. different stages over everything. Some of us might still be sort of in the mud down there. Some of us might be sort of half unfolded already above the surface. But we all have got that potential. We've all got that in us. We all can unfold if the sort of conditions are right, if the nutrients are sort of all there, and if the sun is shining and all that. So this is I think it's a very positive image. It's much better than, I don't know, a sort of image of humanity as inherently sinful or something. So this is that ideal, is that idea that we are like a lotus. We have a sort of Buddha within us, which can flourish and which we can become. We can become this sort of enlightened being, whatever that means really. So it's that higher potential within us. It gives us something transcendental to look forward to. Now the interesting thing is that, I mean, some people respond quite strongly to Buddha figures. Some people might not actually be that into the Buddha for various reasons. Now, the interesting thing is that obviously that principle, that Buddha principle, is actually a much more impersonal myth in a way, or a much more impersonal thing. So for us, the transcendental, in Christianity, that would be God. It would be a sort of personified thing almost. It would be something like a person, even though he's obviously not human. The closest thing to a person for us is the Buddha. But if you look at the cosmology of it, Buddhas appear out of that transcendental truth which lies behind it. So the transcendental in Buddhism is actually something more impersonal. It's more like a sort of force or something, or just a sort of something that is part of reality, which brings forth Buddhas. Yeah. But because he's sort of for us the closest to that reality, this is why he's got such a central position in our tradition, because he is the person who discovered that truth, who realized that truth within our age, and which has sort of passed down through time towards us. So the Buddhist idea of something divine, something transcendental, isn't actually something, a sort of personified force which has got sort of a will or something. It is much more closer to, I don't know if you've ever read Philip Pullman's book, his Dark Materials. I mean, I might spoil it for you now, but I mean, the book has been out for 20 years or something. So, you should have done your work. But basically, he's talking within a sort of Christian setting. I mean, it's The Golden Compass. You've probably seen that movie. Anyway. His idea of the divine is actually, he calls it dust. It's sort of dust particles, which are kind of hovering sort of between something impersonal, something which isn't sort of located anywhere, but which sort of diffuses everything. It diffuses everything. And he sort of portrays God as this sort of really old man who's sort of speaking nonsense all the time, who just sort of evaporates at the end because it's the end of his life. So it's a bit of a retelling of certain Christian ideals. And it's a bit more closer to that, like the Buddhist view is a bit more closer to that. It's not so, we don't believe in dust particles, which are sort of divine. That's a bit too much of a material metaphor. But for Buddhism, there is a sort of transcendental reality which has something to do with consciousness, which is much more on that level of enlightened consciousness, which brings forth enlightened beings, which is, that potential which lies in each and one of us. And I think we do need that kind of outlook. I mean, I think we are all, because we live in a sort of postmodern world these days. We've sort of gotten rid of God many times since the 19th century. We can see that is kind of is creating all sorts of problems for us. Well, we didn't want the medieval version of Christianity. That's in Europe. That's speaking from a very Eurocentristic view, obviously, but you do get that in other parts of the world as well, which are becoming more and more westernized. That sort of old ideas of tradition and culture are getting sort of thrown out of the window for sort of good reasons in a way, because they have been they're not sort of they don't work anymore for us. But we haven't I don't think we have come up with a sort of positive new version of how to be together and how to live, which I think creates all sorts of issues for us. We do sort of struggle for, well, what is good and bad now? What is meaning? Where do we find meaning if everything's possible? And if the only thing that exists is matter? I think we do end up with quite a kind of well, anyway, that's what I felt. I really felt that quite strongly with 19, feeling like completely empty. Like I just saw that void in front of me, feeling like, well, that can't be it. If my life is just about the material world, and if I work enough, and then that's that. I just refused to believe that. I just did not want that. I mean, there's this interesting quote by Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, who said that we've fallen from the roof of the medieval cathedral right into the abyss of self. So we sort of jumped off the roof of the medieval cathedral, but we've fallen right into the abyss of self. There was no intermediate sort of step, as it were. I mean, people have tried to come up with intermediaries, especially in the 19th century. The whole Romantic movement tried to sort of replace religion with culture and with music, with art and all that. And I think that's a sort of good, but it didn't capture the whole society element. So we need some sort of, I think, we need some sort of vision for our life, something that gives us direction, which is sort of beyond just the mere personal, something that we collectively can do. Because the problem is, this is again what the Buddha is saying, is that whether we want it or not, we all have views about the world, and the views we have are shaping our lives and the lives of others. So to either have a sort of theistic view or a non-theistic view or an atheistic view, that will have its consequences. To hold certain views has its consequences in the way we feel, the way we act, the way we are together. Yeah, the Buddha says that this is basically the main problem, is that we live in a world which is just this jungle of views, and it's quite interesting. It's the more I practice, the more I get sort of sensitive towards views. You see them sort of being, I mean, especially on social media and all that, you just get views. It's always on that level of views, of what is right, what is not right, how the world works, how it doesn't work. And we're just in this sort of minefield of different views these days, which is very polarizing, I think. Now, the Buddha said, well, what we should do is we should move from views that are unhelpful, that create suffering, to views that are a bit more in line with reality. So, for example, these very fundamental Buddhist views of, let's say, impermanence, that there's no fixed core to things, the non-self, these kinds of things, to what he called no view. Yeah, so he said he has no view in the sense of being attached to one single ideology or the other, but being so in contact with reality, so alive to life itself, that you wouldn't have to need to hold a view. Yeah, you'd be just so in touch with how the world works that you'd just be able to. I mean, this is the ideal. This is basically what enlightenment looks like, I think. You'd just be completely and spontaneously, compassionately active. Yeah, this is the workings of an enlightened mind. You wouldn't have to put people into a box. You would see the sameness behind everyone, the same sort of humanness behind each person. But at the same time, you'd be able to see the distinctiveness behind everyone as well. What makes them special? What makes them unique? This is really what I think is what we can learn from Buddhism, is that view that we're all, on some level, the same in terms of being human. We're all faced with the same sort of existential situation, and at the same time, we're all distinct and unique, and no one's the same, because we've got all these sort of differences, and we can't really put boxes. We can't really put ourselves into different boxes. Oh dear. sort of went on from one there. So anyway, I've sort of already sparked this off into the next section, which is the Dharma, which is the path or the truth, which is really behind it all. That really is what the Buddha meant when he was saying that there's this kind of truth, this reality behind life, which is what brings forth enlightened beings. That's that truth, and we do need truth. But the thing that we need to keep in mind in Buddhism is that the truth we speak about in Buddhism is a truth which we can't put into words. Okay, so it's a truth that we cannot put into words. It's a truth which can't be defined by mere concepts. It's a truth which has to be experienced and which has to be manifested within us through practice, through meditation, through being in community, through ethical behavior, etc., etc. So, because otherwise you get into this weird dogmatic thing about, oh, Buddhism believes this and not that, and being a Buddhist is about this. It's actually not that clear. It's actually not that clear whatsoever. The Buddha said different things to different people because they were sort of at different points in their journey and had held different views. So whatever that reality or that truth is, it is not what it is. It's not what we are experiencing right now. But it is part of it as well, and it's sort of lying behind it. And it is only something that we can see once we're there, in a way. Yeah, it's something we can just sort of intuit or feel, which can only be kind of expressed or hinted at through, well, I think symbols like images or music or experiences in meditation or with other people. So I think this is very, very important, because otherwise we get into a whole, I don't know, we sort of think, well, Buddhism believes this particular thing and not that, and it becomes sort of political almost, that, you know, oh, well, if you're a Buddhist, surely you must be into that thing, or you must be into, I don't know, you must be a left-wing, I don't know, climate activist or something. Well, you could be, but you don't have to be, yeah? I mean, Buddhism was very, very popular with right-wing groups as well in Germany around the Nazi time and all that, but for very different reasons, obviously for quite bad reasons. But, you know, this is the interesting thing about Buddhism, you can mold it into whatever form you want and rationalize your own views into it. Really, the discovery of truth puts everything you know into question. Because the whole point of enlightenment is that you put your whole sense of self into question. So you will have to give up everything. But you will gain quite a lot. Well, don't give it up to us. Yeah, you give it sort of in a metaphoric kind of way. Yeah, it might have sounded a bit culty. I'm sorry. We don't want you. Please don't give yours yourself. So do you see what I mean? It's very important to realize that we bring all sorts of views and expectations to the truth, which, I have absolutely no idea what the truth is. Like, I genuinely don't know. It's just something that, well, we'll have to see, you know? We'll have to see. There's a humility there, I think, which is important, which we will need. Oh dear, I've got so much more, but I feel like I've already given you quite a lot to think about. So the practice of Buddhism is, you know, consists of, you know, things like meditation, things like looking at our behavior, things like looking at a way of seeing of truth, being in community, and all these sort of elements. They're not the truth itself. They're just helping us to grow like that lotus. Yeah, they're just there to help us grow like that lotus. So they're all just sort of means to an end. Yeah, they're all provisional. Once we're there, we wouldn't need them anymore. Yeah, we wouldn't need all these different teachings. We wouldn't need, because we are then those teachings. We will then end up being those teachings. Well, let me move on. I have some really good points in here, but I think I will skip over them. You will have to come back at a different time. I was going to say something about effort and about authenticity, but I think that's going too far now. well, maybe I'll weave it in the next bit. So then the third thing, obviously, that we're looking at is the Sangha, is the community. And again, I feel like we need real community. This is one thing that if you talk to East Germans, it's just one of those things that I mean, I was obviously born after the wall fell, but if you talk to people who lived in East Germany, like the one thing that they all agree on, which they miss from those days, is the sense of community and belonging. Is a sense of sort of being together and being in the same boat, and we do see that obviously a sort of growing isolation within younger people, within ourselves, within the modern world. So it is something that, yeah, it's a bit of it's this sort of strange phenomenon. On the one hand, we are kind of really connected through, I don't know, Zoom and social media and all this kind of stuff. There's this how do you say, this sort of image which is created that we're all really connected now, but really on that sort of basic human level, I think we're getting more and more isolated. You can see it in Japan. Japan had that like 10 years ago already, which we're sort of running into now. And people long for community. I mean, this is sort of why they come to Berlin, and it is interesting talking to old friends of mine who all left Berlin because they felt like they couldn't really become part of a community which is sort of stable. And I think this is one of the great things we have to offer here in the center, is that sense of, no, there is a community here that you can be part of, which is sort of, well, hopefully going to be there for a while. But usually these days communities are very fleeting. They're sort of very transitory. And we all do need just real, genuine contact. So what I mean by community isn't a kind of, again, Buddhism asks quite a lot from us here. It is quite a, it asks us to be open to that real and genuine contact. Because what happens if you practice mindfulness, if you practice metta, all of a sudden the people around you start to become people. This is one of those things which I've noticed very strongly in meditation. Now I can be perfectly happy on my own. I can like live in my whole sort of fantasy world for weeks and not notice that there's like, I don't know, how many people are there? Like 9 billion people on this planet or something. It's like I can just really go on being like completely happy with just my own thoughts, with my own worlds. And then starting to meditate, starting to have awareness for other people, starting to have metta, it's just like there's all these people around me who are like alive and who have lives. Isn't that amazing? There's people. Isn't that so amazing that we can just be with people? Like what we've always wanted. We don't need to be alone in a way. And aloneness, I think, doesn't necessarily come from literally being separated and isolated, although it obviously might do, but in some cases. But I think genuinely I think we can really work on that. We can really, through developing metta, you feel less and less alone because you just realize there's just like beings everywhere. Like, I mean, especially when you're in a city like this one, I mean, there's like beings everywhere. Now, they might not always give you what you want, especially not in Berlin, but there's an aliveness around you. Yeah, there's aliveness around us. So what we need is genuine communication, by which I mean, communication which isn't just remote, obviously, but which is also not sentimental. Sometimes it can kind of veer into a sort of sentimental, like, yeah, I hear you, I feel you, that kind of, yeah, but what does it mean? What does that actually mean to be in contact with someone else? What does it mean? Like, you get that kind of, I mean, sorry, I might be a bit mean here, but you get that in sort of certain kind of yoga circles sometimes, that kind of like, we're like in contact, and what does it mean? Like, I always ask myself, what do you mean by that? I think what it means is, what we, in order to have real contact with someone else, we really need to free ourselves from our expectations and sort of views that we have from the other person, and be just completely open to whatever the other person might turn out to be. It's very, very difficult, for example, in relationships, because you just get into a relationship and you have this whole image of the other person, which after 5 years comes crumbling down, maybe quicker, maybe later. But it's just that kind of. It's that is what I mean by views, is to sort of be completely aware of your views, learning how to be self-contained, sort of not neurotically dependent on others. This is what Sangharakshita, the founder of our order, calls becoming a true individual. So not someone who's individualistic or sort of just wants to be alone all the time, I don't need other people, but to be sort of genuinely self-loving, genuinely sort of self-nurtured, genuinely sort of, you just know yourself. So you're full, that's basically comes at the end of metta and awareness. You could say you start to become a true individual, which then allows you to be even more effective in community. Yeah, I think only then we are able to actually be in community, because we can give freely, we can receive freely. We're not sort of grasping for attention and affection. And sort of being in that contact means also helping others to become true individuals, not being sort of feeling overly responsible for the others' well-being in that neurotic way. In a kind way, obviously, we want to make sure people are happy genuinely, but so to sort of sometimes that kind of longing for community can kind of, I think, can kind of spill over into that kind of neurotic, really like only if the other person is okay, I'm okay kind of thing, which is just like, you just sort of drag each other down. That's usually what happens. But if you can just be yourself and not be dependent on that, you can actually really help much better. You can actually just let go of yourself then and just sort of just listen, really. I mean, most of the things, I think, are just solved by just listening. So much of our friendships and, well, to be quite fair, political situations would be much better if you could just learn to listen. We don't need to say things. You don't need to have like an opinion on everything. If we just listen, so much of, I don't know, the world would be better, I think. So anyway, well, this was fun. Oh dear. Well, you can see we're getting into a darker time. Anyway, what I was trying to stress was more, this was sort of I suppose this was my journey, really. So sorry for putting that all on you. This is what inspires me, at least. Might not be what's inspiring for you, but for me, really, to turn towards the Buddha means to acknowledge that there is something higher, that there is something that we can look up to, that looking up in itself is something that gives us meaning, that gives us great satisfaction, that gives us direction in life, that gives us vision, and we do need vision. Following the Dharma, following something like a path that leads us to truth is important, because we all long for truth. You can see that. I mean, everyone's these days longing for truth. You can see that in social media posts about how to, I mean, everything's about how to behave these days, isn't it? It's like we really are sort of struggling for truth. And we need community, because I think in community, if we are really in touch with people, a lot of that kind of alienation and that kind of polarization wouldn't happen if we were actually in just real contact, because we would have to listen to each other. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. And Sangha also means, learning from others. Maybe just to finish on that, one of my greatest experiences of that kind of Sangha was at my own ordination. So for me, the idea of having something like a teacher in life, having someone that I can learn from, someone who's sort of more developed than I am, is also quite foreign, coming from a very egalitarian society. And I always had a bit of an authority problem. I would always sort of do the weird jokes in class and be thrown out of the classroom because I would be rebelling. And be like really obnoxiously discussing everything and being sort of too smart for the teacher. So I had to let go of that as well, because there are people who have more experience, and from those we can learn. So for me, in my ordination, the way the ordination happens within our order is that there's one part of the ordination ceremony is what we call the private ordination, and you ask someone, a senior order member, to ordain you. So in my case, this was Dharmapriya. He also lives in Berlin, and I mean, there's this huge age gap between us. He was like sort of in his early 70s, and I was in my mid 20s. So it took us a while to sort of get flowing together. And he's from Canada, I'm from Germany. So there's all these sort of differences between us. But I really felt that sense. No, I can learn from this person. I can really learn from him. And the moment so what you do is you go on I went on a 4-month retreat. Ordinations are happening. You're being called to the ordination stupa or the ordination kuti or whatever it's called. It's a sort of separate shrine room somewhere away from the main retreat center. So I go. There was like a great storm happening. It was all very dramatic. I had sort of theme music playing in my mind. And you walk there alone, because this is what you're saying with that ordination. You say, well, I will do this. I commit to this. I commit to this path for the whole of my life, really. You sort of crawl into this like tiny space. So there's just you're just in this tiny space, and all of a sudden in front of me, I didn't see him before, is Dhammapriya. And he's a very sort of stern man usually. So he's very very correct and all that, and very intelligent. But in that moment, there was just this like intense warmth coming to me. There was just this like intense love oozing from him. Like it was almost unbearable to just be like, he was just like, and the first thing he said was, "I'm really happy that you're here. I'm really happy that you're sitting in front of me." And then he had this like really playful way of going through the ceremony. Then he actually made a mistake and we had to start again. He was like, "Oh, I made a mistake. Let's start again." And then we sort of, and then we just went through it. But it was just this like the sense of this sort of support and this kind of love coming almost through him or something from this whole lineage, from this whole tradition, almost from the Buddha almost. And I really want to end on that because maybe it sounded a bit tough what I was saying before, that there is definitely a need. But to step into that and to learn to look up, for me, was that all that meant was an opening up, a receiving of love and support, which sort of came from beyond, if you want to put it in a poetic kind of way. So maybe I'll end here.